Hey, welcome to Graphic Policy Television Weekly. Yes, GPT Weekly. It's something we've hinted at and talked about some videos here and there for some time. And we're going to go and kick it off here because this past week in news for comics has been kind of crazy, and there's been some hot topics, things that we need to discuss and go over. So, Graphic Policy Television Weekly, I'm your host, Brett. I'm the founder and blogger-in-chief of Graphic Policy. I'm going to be your host for the show. I'm going to play out with the format as weeks go on, and we learn a little bit more about what works, what doesn't work, and what you would like to see. I'm here to promise that there's going to be no spin news. We're going to give you straight at you opinion and facts, sticking to what matters most and what we actually really care about. Each week we're going to talk about the week in the past for the comic industry, and maybe look towards the future a little bit as far as what was and what will be, and things like releases and news and events, stuff like that. So, welcome to our pilot episode. I'm going to subtitle it Polarity, because that's going to be a lot of the topic of this episode. So, before we get to the news, let's talk about some of the comics that came out in this past week, and some of what's coming out this week, Wednesday, May 15th. So last week, we're going to go over some of the big ones that stand out to me. We got Cobra Volume 2. This is an amazing series. If you like action comics, superhero stuff, this is like an indie spin on that. It's now being published by Image Comics. The first, I think, 5 volumes have all been reprinted by Image, and you can go get them. If you've not checked out this series, absolutely go get it. Excellence #1, it's a new series from Skybound and Image. Absolutely fantastic. It's a world where magic rules. Not a fantasy, it's set in our world, and goes over this kind of family and setup and houses and stuff like that. It's a really, really cool debut. Absolutely check it out. From DC, we've got Batman and the Outsiders #1. The story itself was decent. I really like the dynamic of the team mostly. I gave it a fairly positive review on that. Great stuff there. Brian Underhill is the writer. We've got 6 Days, the incredible story of D-Day's lost chapter about a drop that went wrong in D-Day. With the 75th anniversary coming up, this is going to be a really important graphic novel to check out and learn some history. Very cool comic. I liked it a lot. Great graphic novel. It was not what I expected. And then, of course, we got War of the Realms, New Agents of Atlas from Marvel, one of the miniseries that are spinning out of the, I would actually call it subpar War of the Realms event, but this one has sold out, had a whole bunch of debut characters that have only been in video games before Marvel's Future Fight, so this was their comics debut, and that has led to a sellout first issue. So if you can get it, get it. So this Wednesday, we see a whole lot of releases. Of course, you can check out our full list of things coming out at graphicpolicy.com. But things that stand out to me, we got Last Stop on the Red Line, Dark Horse Comics, Paul Mayberry. It sounds like a really cool supernatural thriller. We got Batman 71. This is on the radar because Tom King has said that his what he's going to be doing for Batman is going to change him for a generation. So this is going to be a big one to look at. And then there's the hardcover release of Mr. Miracle. If you have not seen the series, read the series, also by Tom King and Mitch Gerads on art. It's amazing, absolutely fantastic. One of the best comics to come out last year. And of course, Marvel is still going strong with their War of the Realms event. Giant Man #1 is out this week, one of the latest spin-offs, and also Spider-Man and the League of Realms. And then the other one's Immortal Hulk #17. Immortal Hulk's been basically on fire these last few months. Issues have been skyrocketing in value for back issues, so get on there. Lower print run, hot issue, great series, absolutely fantastic series, well deserved. So go get that. Not from the big two, not from the top publishers. We got Xena Warrior Princess. Hearing great things about this. Black Ridge #10 from Boom. Black Ridge is also, it's like messed up Cub Scouts. Aspen has their latest volume of Fathom, Volume 8 for Fathom #1. For those who aren't into superheroes, and of the big two, you got Life of Toyo Harada at #3 and Live Warrior #6 from Valiant. And of course, Ahoy Comics has Planet of the Nerds #2. Ahoy is an absolutely amazing publisher. You don't just get like a main story, you get backup stories, prose, all for $3.99. It's packed comics. Highly recommend checking out Ahoy. The Wrong Earth Volume 1 is actually out today, Tuesday, at bookstores. It's already been out at comic shops. That's an absolutely fantastic series looking at it's like an homage and riff on superhero comics, both love of them and then original stuff. Wrong Earth is amazing. And then for kids, we like to spotlight some stuff for kids. We got Marvel action Spider-Man #4, published by IDW Publishing, but, you know, obviously it's Spider-Man, so Marvel. And then Science Comics Cars, and then Lumberjanes #62. I think all three are great for kids. The Science Comics is a great series for kids to learn more about some of the things going on in the world, and adults too. You can read it yourself. Great graphic novel series from first to second. Okay, week in the news. It's been a very interesting weeks of stuff. I'm going to stick to the comics for this one. We got Marvel Comics has decided to announce Marvel Comics 1000. They've been hinting at a bunch of creative teams over the past week, and we now know what that means. It means it's 80 creative teams celebrating 80 years of Marvel Comics. There's been some criticism as far as the creative team's very white male, but there's been some interesting things. We got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, for instance, writing. He's actually written some comics, written a lot of Sherlock Holmes stuff. I can't wait to see that. So definitely tons of talented people, very usual criticism of comics as far as the makeup of that. The other big deal is Dark Horse and Netflix has signed a exclusive first look deal. Now what this means is that Netflix is going to be able to check out the series that Dark Horse publishes and do maybe television or movies on Netflix from that. And then this spins out of the success of Umbrella Academy, which has been a huge hit for Netflix and has got a second season pickup already. And then this movie Polar debuted on Netflix as well. And that seems to have done pretty well, enough to kick off this deal. So we have another comic publisher funneling to other media, television, and movies as well. But really, that's kind of the segue to like the big story of the week revolving around Lion Forge Comics. They announced a lot and started the week off really, really well with some interesting stuff. But the first question is, who is Lion Forge? So Lion Forge. So they were founded in 2011 by David Stewart II and Carl Reed. You're going to see here Stewart's name comes up a bunch because he's actually pretty key in what we're going to be talking about. So mostly had licensed comics when it started from NBC Universal, that things like Airwolf and Knight Rider, Miami Vice, Punky Brewster, Saved by the Bell. The comics were okay, and the fact that you probably don't remember them says, well, pretty much everything. 2014, they signed a deal with IDW Publishing to actually print their comics, or really release their comics through IDW so they can get into things like Diamond. That deal has gone away since, and Lion Forge has been their own thing, launching a whole bunch of lines, imprints, Roar, Caracol, Cubhouse. They bought Magnetic, and then Quillian is their latest. And then their kind of like the big news in recent years is the Catalyst Prime universe, a new superhero universe launched, I think, in 2014, that was all about diversity and new characters and kind of a new take on the whole superhero line. They found some success with their Voltron comics. We're going to get into that a little bit more. Voltron comics actually made it into Target, and a lot of the times I've been in the Target, I see the stand for the Voltron comics and no comics, which means they've probably sold out or they forgot to stock them. But the Voltron comic seems to be a success for this publisher, and the Catalyst stuff has been going on. It has a big event coming up this summer, headed up by Gail Simone, so we'll see where everything goes from there. I mean, Catalyst seems to be kind of now the center of Lion Forge, and again, we're going to talk about that. So, as I said, I've mentioned David Stewart II for a reason. So he's the son of David Stewart, who founded Worldwide Technology. It's a $5 billion tech startup, or tech firm. And Stewart is the senior, is just one of like 4 black billionaires in the United States. Forbes had him listed at 755th as far as wealth in the United States in their billionaires list. So this is a guy who comes from money and success. The Stewart, the senior, has a net worth of about $3.9 billion. Again, money, success. So that money was part of the pitch of Stewart II, that he was coming from this successful family. He had money to back all of this, and he was tech savvy. That was part of Lion Forge's launch. That was a lot of what we heard in the background, that this was a person who knew business and was coming from a business standpoint and was going to kind of bring this ethos, this ethic, this know-how to comics. So as I said, launched it in 2011, and they haven't done a whole lot since. It's been 8 years. And we've got Catalyst, and we're going to really kind of talk about where that's gone. So, talking about Lion Forge, on Monday, they announced the launch of Polarity. So Polarity is basically kind of like is now their parent company. So Polarity is its new parent company, and then expands Stewart's focus not just on comics, but also include, in their own words, visual storytelling, animation, developing intellectual property for all media and emerging platforms, again, their words, original music, and the home of the comic news site, The Beat. So the mission creep has expanded from Lionforge. Instead of just creating IP and new characters, they are going to create the new media for these new characters. So, not just a Catalyst comic, but maybe Catalyst Prime video games and books and music, I guess. It's mission creep. It happens a lot with technology and in various companies. So I bring up Stewart's background in tech for a reason. Because as Polarity launched, they launched this website. So as you see, this website's pretty jacked up. A week later, it still looks like this. It's run on WordPress, which is pretty much a plug-and-play system. That's what our site is actually built on. And our site's not all that fancy and definitely looks better than this. For about $300 and an intern, you can have a business site and not this broken thing that we have up on our screen. So the funny part is that launch of that website and the initial announcement of Polarity is the least of the clusterfuck of the week for Lionforge and Polarity. Things just got worse from there. So on Wednesday, Polarity announced they were merging, again, their words, with Oni Press, the comics publisher out of Portland, Oregon. While in the initial Puff News article, they were deciding on staffing, they had already decided on staffing between the two companies. Not even 2 hours later, we got word of firings coming out of the two companies and two publishers. And from what we can tell, it's about double digits at least gone from that. So that's also on top of the 11 fired from Lionforge in November of 2018. So in about 6 months' time, 7 months' time, we've seen Lionforge drop probably 24 people as far as staffing. It's not really a place of strength for a company. So in reality, while the word merger was used, this was actually an acquisition by Polarity to offload their flailing comics business to Oni, who might be able to manage it a little better. So gone is the Lionforge editorial staff, except for two who handle Lionforge's Catalyst Prime comic line, which is going to stay at Lionforge, and then all of the indie comics that Lionforge is doing, and actually some found success, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Those are going over to Oni, who has really, really done a fantastic job doing and handling those type of comics. Now, the reason Catalyst isn't moving over as well is David Stewart, that's his, baby. He really is into the Catalyst line, so much so there's word from those we've talked to in the past of lots of not really editorial interference, but interference in general about Stewart with changes of character, storylines, and series kind of focus. So Stewart's very hands-on with Catalyst Prime, which is kind of interesting for an owner of a company not focused on running the company, but is still instead of micromanaging and not letting his staff do what they kind of need to do. So now the first question is, if these things are moving over to Oni, you still have Catalyst Prime, why are you firing tons of people? There's no words on cutting the number of titles. In fact, it kind of seemed like titles volume would remain fairly similar. So if you have that sort of volume still going on, you probably still need at least some of that staff that you fired. Kind of interesting. So that's really the first question we got. But the bigger question is, why did Polarity purchase Oni? So reality is, Catalyst Prime hasn't charted in the top 1,000 for every year that it's launched. In fact, Lionforge has had, I think, one comic in the top 1,000. 4 comics in the top 1,000 between trades and single issues since they've launched in 2011. It's not to say that they aren't doing well or selling anything, but they haven't charted for the estimates for Diamond that have come out thanks to Comic-Con. In fact, Lionforge's biggest success is in 2018. They did Sheets and Puerto Rico Strong. I think there was a third book. I forgot what it is. On average, they did about 2,908 issues between those 3 books. First trades. The first time they've charted on anything was Voltron in 2017, which did 1,725. In fact, 2017... Lion Forge made up a little over 0.1% in both dollars and units, according to Comicron, when it comes to Diamond, at $0.16, 0.13 units. Now let's compare that to Oni. Oni has done much better, anywhere from 0.4 or 0.5 to 1% as far as dollars and units for Diamond since 2016, and it's really 2015 where Oni took off. From 2011, we're kind of looking at that going forward. Oni has found success when it comes to the Scott Pilgrim books. That's where they've driven a lot. They put out their new colored versions of that series and found success with that. In 2015, they started getting into licensed comics more and did the Invader Zim and Rick and Morty, and things took off. In fact, on average, in 2015, they did 43,882 for an issue that came out, which is actually really, really good for a comic. I believe that was Invader Zim. And then in 2018, they did almost 30,000 on average for comics that came out and charted in the top 1,000. Again, pretty good for a solid for a company that doesn't focus on floppy monthly comics. As far as trades, they've been anywhere from about 2,000 to 5,000. I think it's 5,000. They might go a little bit higher. There might be a 6,000 somewhere. Yep, about 5,000 is the highest that they've done since 2011. Again, finding a lot of success with Invader Zim, Rick and Morty. So Oni not only had success when it comes to their comics. Sorry, I want to grab a prop somewhere if I can find it quickly. Yeah, there we go. They're also finding success with licensed comics. That kind of brings us to this. So Catalyst Prime has been charting, and Oni has shown what they can do. So Polarity has been kind of failing. Lion Forge, I would say, was a failing business, probably losing some money. And Oni has found success with comics, and now with Floppy's trades. And then Oni has charted with dollars in recent years. So Lion Forge has barely broken anything as far as that. They've barely broken 0.1%. And then the other is Oni has found success beyond comics. We've got, of course, Scott Pilgrim the film. We've got Atomic Blonde, which seems to have done well enough that there's talks of a sequel. And that was based off Coldest Winter graphic novel. And then, of course, you got Whiteout, which came out years ago. And since Polarity really wants to expand in things like music, games, video games, television, movies, Oni has found success with that. They have found partners and they found magic. In my hand is Scott Pilgrim, the precious little card game put out by Renegade that has come out. And this is an example of Oni reaching out. They've also had success with their T-Dragon Society card game that has come out. So Oni is already doing what Polarity wants to do. So Polarity didn't merge with Oni. They acquired Oni to get the expertise that's already there. So in the end, Polarity needs Oni. Oni doesn't necessarily need Polarity. Oni's been doing pretty well in recent years, which is interesting because that completely undercuts Polarity's message. Their pitch is their vision, their strength, and ability in all these media, but from the outsider, it doesn't seem to be the case, that they haven't succeeded in that. They've gotten some licenses, NBC Universal. Notice none of those comics are around anymore. Their only success when it comes to license is Voltron. When it comes to comics themselves, they haven't really done a whole lot. Their Catalyst Prime has gotten a lot of buzz when it started, but again, it didn't even crack the top 1,000 in floppies for any year that it's come out. Now, this doesn't include the book markets or anything like that. We're just going off of Diamond's estimates. So, take all those numbers with a grain of salt. These things could be selling like gangbusters in the things like Barnes & Nobles, and we don't necessarily know about it. In recent years, the Sheets is probably their biggest thing in 2018, a really well-praised graphic novel, and Puerto Rico Strong was a charity anthology and had tons of success off of that, partially because it's a charity anthology and got lots of news. This isn't going to be an ongoing thing for them. But from the outsider, what Polarity's pitching doesn't seem to be what their strengths are at all. So they needed to purchase an expert in what they want to do in Oni. So then there's the firings. So layoffs are expected in mergers, totally understand about that. But here we have a double-digit butcher's bill over a 7-month period, mostly of women, people of color, people with disabilities, from a company whose pitch is about diversity and that they've got money to do all this. Altogether, these people might have been $1.5–2 million of overhead in the year between salaries and insurance and all those costs. Let's say even if it's $2–3 million. If you're coming from $1 billion family, I think you can go and spend $2 million in a year to kind of keep a staff and get it tight. and really figure out your strengths and weaknesses from there. Instead, we have immediate firings to I think their pitch was like for that better health of the company or something like that. Well, if you're doing an acquisition and you're talking about how you have this money, the health of the company is part of your pitch in all of this. So these firings aren't necessarily, are kind of undercutting what your message is. On top of that, you go into the weekend where we had TCAF, and the buzz out of TCAF, attendees were talking about this. Librarians are worried as to the commitment of diversity from this publisher going forward. You know, libraries and the book market have been booming. They found tons of success in graphic novels and trades that are to a diverse audience. And this is something that Lionforge was excelling in. Unfortunately, they fired the people who have been largely behind that. So librarians are now very worried about this future of the company. And now you've taken a week's worth of what should have been positive news and completely nerfed it. You've taken away your momentum, so much so that you need to go and do some PR rescue. You have to go and do some spin on this. Instead of the conversation being on Wednesday about this acquisition and merger, instead the conversation's about these firings. This is how not to do a press launch. Again, enough so that damage control was being done, and the management team of Polarity had to go and save face with what was a fairly fluff interview. And again, there's nothing wrong with mergers. We're not against mergers and acquisitions, but unfortunately, layoffs do happen with this, and this past week has shown how not to handle that sort of layout and how to do the damage control afterwards. I mean, Disney's purchase of Fox will cost upwards of 10,000 jobs is the estimate. They didn't go off and fire 10,000 people right away. They spent some time and actually tried to figure out how this is going to work, and I'm sure they have a better idea than they were actually going with. But, a firing would have completely undercut their message once things were going on, and kind of, that would have become the news, really. But overall, I mean, it points also not to an issue with the sales and comics industry, but really a pattern that's going on as far as investors, as far as in the comic industry. Folks who are getting into it to basically create IP farms thinking they're going to become the next Marvel and make bank off of this. And we've seen time and time again, that's just not the way it works. The comics is a long time game. I mean, Marvel's been around for 80 years, and it took them 60 to 70 of that to get their act together as far as movies and really get things going. I mean, yes, Avengers Endgame made $2 billion and will likely become the highest grossing film ever, but that's also been after 10 years of work. Lionforge has been around for 8, and they really haven't shown IP for most of that that's original for at least the last couple of it. So what, maybe 4 of it, 5 of it at most, 2 of it? So in the end, this is becoming a bigger issue for the comic industry as a whole. There's many publishers who have taken venture capital who are looking at this as a IP game to make a lot of money, and that's just not how it works. That's not the reality of it all, and are getting nervous when it comes to the things. So if you really want to make money in comics, go play the lottery instead. You have a much better chance. And from an outsider, I don't exactly see the ledgers. I've heard rumblings from folks. Lionforge and Polarity is a dot-com bubble of the comic industry, without the buzzwords, whose potential for catalyst seems to have been squandered in the years that has come out. And I think that's what is going to be the message of probably the next year or two of comics, is that we're going to experience the dot-com bubble that has hit so much of other tech. All these investors are going to want their money back, and you're going to see a lot of sales and mergers to try to strengthen lines, strengthen publishers, and look past those press releases and fluffy articles. Look at the actual details of things like the sales and where things are charted and how much debt someone actually has. So while I wish the entire team that remains luck, and I really do hope for their success and best for them, this past week hasn't really instilled any confidence in me as far as that. So thank you for our first episode and joining us. As always, we're going to wrap it up. And I'd like to hear your feedback as far as that. If you'd like to hear different types of segments, what type of things you would like to see in us cover, be happy to do that. And as always, you can check us out every single day at graphicpolicy.com. We're on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Tumblr, all at Graphic Policy, keeping it nice and consistent. Until next time, we're going to try to do this weekly. going to launch hopefully on Sunday. We're already working on the next episode and know exactly what we're going to talk about. As from the heart, thank you so much for joining me on this debut episode. Until next time, keep reading those comics and support your local comic shop. Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.